Bonjour à toutes et tous, vous écoutez First Print, votre podcast comics préféré pour une nouvelle émission du format SuperFriends. C'est l'émission qui va à la rencontre des personnes qui font vivre la culture comics et la pop culture par leur travail. Et vous le savez, avec First Print, avec le long terme, l'avantage c'est qu'on peut parfois avoir des invités récurrents, des personnes qui viennent présenter plusieurs de leurs travaux. C'est un peu plus rare de le faire avec des artistes et des auteurs américains, mais aujourd'hui, c'est bien ce qu'on fait, puisqu'on va recevoir de nouveau dans le podcast Robert Myler Anderson et Jon Sack, qui étaient venus il y a bientôt 2 ans pour présenter Windows on the World, et aujourd'hui ils viennent parler de leur nouvel album Mon Parrain, la Bonne Fée, My Fairy Godfather, qui vient de sortir chez Comics Initiative. Ils ont bravé à nouveau l'océan et les mers pour venir nous voir en France, et donc c'est avec un grand plaisir que je les accueille à nouveau. Donc l'interview sera évidemment en anglais comme la dernière fois, puis une fois le générique passé, je vous laisse en compagnie de Robert et de Jon. So you didn't understand anything what I was saying?
I guess got a little bit of it. Yeah.
Jon, you speak a little bit French, but hey, it's really great to have you guys back in the podcast. Thank you for being here. Hello, Robert.
It's good. It's great to be back here. It was fun to see you down at the convention too.
At Angoulême.
Yeah.
When I managed to let you in, to get you in.
We weren't going to get in without you. The one person we know, excuse me for my sexy voice here, but I got a little bit of a cold. But yeah, the one person we know, we see in amidst the sea of people, the throngs of people, and you get us in.
Yeah.
I love it.
And that was me because, we just met at before the security. The security wouldn't let you in. And I happen to be here like a guardian angel, something like that. You can call me that, but no, I'm not. Jon, also you're here.
Hello.
And you can say bonjour.
Bonjour tout le monde, je suis là.
Voilà, you speak a little bit French. So this is really nice, like I said, to have you back here on the podcast. And we are here to discuss about comics, obviously, because there's a new book. Since the last time we met, you got to do another book, which is Mon Parrain, la Bonne Fée. I really like to say it in French. And so first question, how did you guys... No, not how, but what made you guys wanted to work together again after Windows on the World?
It's true. After all that that we went through, it's a surprise that we wanted to work with each other. No, I think personally, after 2.5 years of working on the book, I think we both learned a lot. I know I learned a ton about graphic novels and the process, and not just that, but working with Jon and liking to work with Jon and creating a language and a shorthand and a way to work that we took on a little bit more or something different by working in color and dealing with a different kind of subject matter in a way. Yeah. And so all of that worked really well again for the next 2 years. And I think we're getting better at it.
Yeah, we are.
I like to say we're like a mini movie
like
studio,
a production unit.
We're like a production unit. We do the casting, we do the location scouting, we do the wardrobe, way ahead of time. And the first 2 books were based on screenplays, but the next one is being based intentionally to be a graphic novel. So it won't be a blueprint for a film that we use as a blueprint for a graphic novel. It'll be a blueprint for a graphic novel based on the fact that we've worked together for 5 years now.
Yeah. Since 2016. I think when we started working on Mon Parrain, la Bonne Fée, try to say that correctly.
You can say My Fairy Godfather.
My Fairy Godfather.
It might be easier for you.
Doing Windows on the World was my first work of fiction.
Yeah.
And it was a learning process for both of us. And I read the story for My Fairy Godfather after we had finished Windows on the World. And it wasn't entirely finished yet, but there was something there. It was a great story I could see. And when I read it, I was like, this has to be in color. I can't not see this in color.
Follow the yellow brick road. The yellow brick road's got to be got to be yellow, got to be golden.
Yeah.
What was the specifics of doing that work in color? What did it bring to you in terms of learning, but also in terms of storytelling?
For me, it just Well, to be honest, when I saw the story in color, I just thought I really want to do something in color. It's my first time using color. And I thought, actually, because doing Windows on the World was a lot of work. And it was a longer book than I think either of us had anticipated. So changing my drawing style a little bit from Windows on the World, I thought it would be a quicker process. It turns out I was wrong. It was still quite laborious, but in a different way because, I hand draw everything. And then all the color was done in Photoshop. And initially for the first 30 pages, I had no idea what I was doing with color. I didn't know if it looked good, if it looked garish, but I think after a while I kind of settled on a palette and just, made it consistent throughout the book. So I feel like I've learned quite a few artistic lessons just through the process of making this book. And I think the next book we're going to do is going to be in color as well, but it's going to be a little bit different.
All right. So you told her that the story for My Fairy Godfather was a screenplay at first?
It was a screenplay, yes, absolutely. Wrote a tight screenplay during COVID about it. I figured I would use my time wisely there. And so an old story that I had thought of a long time ago, I wanted to bring to life because I thought it again became, people kept telling me, wow, that's a great story. It's super topical, which is interesting because people said that about Windows on the World. And, I wrote that with my cousin in 2002. And by the time it came out, it was still topical. I think partially because both stories are really just about people in humanity. And we're searching for something that is past the context of politics. I mean, what you do is political, and how they react is political, and the culture and the setting in which they live in is political. But at the end of the day, it's really about the humanness and the interior and the connections that people have and the growth or non-growth that people do, and that kind of moment of shit that we say, moment of shit, where you either become yourself and move forward or don't. And so I think hopefully that will make the books relevant now, relevant into the future. Hopefully in the future, there won't be as many problems with the immigration system or labor in America. And there won't be a big problem about, being gay in America or LGBT, so that's hopefully those things will go away, but the humanness of the story will people will respond to.
I wouldn't be so sure that we wouldn't have problems with immigrations and homosexuality in the next future, but let's hope so. But do you remember what the basis of this story, what you wanted to talk about when you wrote the screenplay?
I oftentimes it's not one thing. It's a situation that I find interesting, and then you pile another situation on top of that, and then you start piling people on top of that. And so then that becomes really interesting for me. So it's not necessarily Windows on the World was what we call like a road movie in a way, where someone sees somebody, meets people along the way, and they don't really, come with them the whole trip. And this one is really about two people that you spend the whole time with. And then there are kind of three other people that you would say are the B story, and the two main characters, how they act and react has a huge influence also on these other three characters, as do the other kind of three characters on them, so that they have that resolution. But the synthesis of it was a long time ago. My brother, I have an older brother, and he had his first child. And in his will, he said that if something were to happen to him and his wife, that his daughter would be looked after by his best friend, who was gay and managed the Castro Theater in San Francisco. So I thought, wow, if something awful happened to my older brother, that Audrey would have like a very interesting life in the Castro, and Mark would have a very interesting life raising a little girl, because it would be really unexpected for him. And then as we came to the story, times have changed too. And one of the interesting conflicts is that Billy, coming from a more liberal place and truly a more liberal generation, doesn't have nearly, the problems or the homophobia or that Adam's generation has. But Adam has to live it, and not only that, she is coming from a more liberal place, not liberal Kansas, but Austin, Texas. And so not only does he have to live his life, he has to live it in a place that's much more conservative. So the young girl doesn't really know the circumstances or have to kind of live his experience. So I found that really interesting as well. And that's partially why we set it in liberal Kansas, is because the Castro in San Francisco is sort of singular. And for me, I felt liberal Kansas is, 40% of America, 60% of America. And my brother's best friend growing up in Ukiah in the 70s, in some ways feels like being raised in, the Midwest or the South or a lot of places, now. We say they're behind the times a little, but
as someone that has never lived in the United States, I would think that Texas would be the most conservative place in the whole United States.
What would be?
Austin, Texas. The Texas is supposed to be really conservative and not liberal. So I was surprised that you would set the story in Kansas because I really don't know about how conservative or liberal are the states.
Austin's quite liberal.
Okay.
In an extremely for Texas, like Texas, you're right. Texas is an extremely conservative state, and to be fair, I don't really know that much about Kansas. I mean, I think I've driven through, on road trips, but I've never actually have spent any time in Kansas.
Yeah, I hope that people in liberal don't feel like we're maligning them in a way. It's, I get it. I'm from a small town called Boonville, and I wrote a novel. It takes place in the town, but it's a fictional attempt, and it's an attempt to piece people together in a particular way. And in some ways, it doesn't reflect on the individuals of liberal. It's an idea like Boonville, that you would be in a liberal place, and it's not necessarily so liberal. It's a conservative town with a meat factory and a smallish high school or medium-sized high school. And so I wanted it to be like, everywhere America. But Austin, well, Texas too. I mean, Texas is a huge state. I mean, Houston's an amazing city. I've been to Houston, spent a little time there. Dallas, been around. Like it's like a lot of, so in America, a lot of times the major cities, even in conservative states, tend to be pretty liberal. And the big question now in our politics is, can the cities and their needs reflect the needs of the rural community too? And the language and how they can speak so that they're not as fearful and that they're more cohesive. Because right now, it's not as cohesive. So,
and just going back to liberal Kansas, I think one of the challenges of this book for us was that it is set in a real town.
Yeah, that was my question.
Yeah, and we made some decisions about, we set it in the actual high school. Their mascot is the Redskins, which is, a derogatory name for Native Americans. And all the places that are drawn into the book, they exist in real life, except for the cinema. The cinema was right. The cinema, we just, kind of made that up, but it's set on the main street through the center of town. And I mean, I spent a lot of time, and I think you did as well, like looking up, we were looking up stuff about the high school. And I went on the high school's Facebook page, looked at hundreds and hundreds of photographs because I wanted to see what the students look like. What do they wear? What does the high school look like? So we are setting it in a real setting, but obviously with a fictional treatment.
The French are much better at understanding that. Like, when you're a writer or an artist, like, your tools are empathy and imagination. And in America right now, especially, people are much more concerned or don't know how that works. And so they're expecting autobiography. And that's not what this is or necessarily what I do. I mean, you take things from your real life, but you imagine and then you empathize and you translate and then it becomes a funhouse mirror. Once it gets, through there, what what I might be, initially my initial impulse or idea may not resemble that at all afterwards. But I went to a high school called Ukiah High School, and it was, I imagine it being somewhat like, the high school in Liberal. And I have 4 kids, and they were all in high school. That helped.
So that's, that was also
my daughter's slang and stuff like that. That helped. And then trying to pick words. And it's in translation first, which is amazing. It's actually out in French before it doesn't come out in America until May. But the choice of using some slang that you hope holds or represents words or a culture or people like that, when that by the time the book comes out, those words are going to mean almost the opposite. Like, you're not going to be cool if you use those words.
No, it's going to be outdated.
Yeah. And so, when I would show my daughters the work, even if it was 6 months later, they were like, oh, no one would ever say that or something, so it's kind of funny where the truths or the little truths or where you're fishing for trying to create a story that resonates, where you said it and who the people are. Those are all big concerns. I hope Liberal embraces it in the same way that Boonville was embraced by my town. Ultimately they liked it, although some people definitely threatened to punch me. So, that's, what can you say?
But that was also one of my questions is how is it hard or not to write teenagers, because all due respect, you're not teenagers anymore. Yeah. And so you answered a little bit of the question because you have children, and I guess that's maybe just talking with them that also helps you remember how you were when you were a teenager, and also to just have you notice the difference between being a teenager 40 years ago and being a teenager right now.
Definitely. Some people would accuse me of having arrested development.
Oh, me too.
And so, I remember my high school days were really traumatic. I moved away from my parents were divorced, and so I moved away from my mother and into a home with my father, kind of, and it was in a completely different setting. I moved from a place that was very liberal. Wow, this is becoming very autobiographical. In Marin County, which is just across from San Francisco, and spent a ton of time in San Francisco and was born there, and moved to Redwood Valley, which is outside of Ukiah. And this doesn't mean much to the French audience, but it's really rural. And it was so bad for me that I took a year off of high school and stayed home and did a kind of off homeschooling. And then my father ran a home for juvenile delinquents, and we moved in there. And I ended up changing to an even smaller high school in Boonville, California, with 19 kids in my class, like less than 100 in the whole school. And so it was very different, and trying to get through the day and the cliques and stuff. I remember that, and being threatened, physically threatened, and all the time until I got my size was just a daily routine. And the music that you had and the culture that you had or didn't have, those were all fighting words, from T-shirts to shoes to class, the class orientation of all that. So in some ways, that's where we're making reference to kind of a John Hughes film too. And in some ways, it's an updated, version of that construct. But I saw my kids going through it, and I also see that my kids are smarter, better, faster, stronger, and less. The culture that they've chewed up and live with in San Francisco in 2024 is much more liberal than myself, and I consider myself pretty liberal, but I have internal biases. That's for sure. It just is, and so you try to deal with that. But yeah, it's tough being a teen. I think these days, really tough.
And is it also something that you used also to draw these characters and to be like, because there's also the body language, and we have a tons of panels when no one says a word but just have a facial expression, or doing just body gesture? Is it I don't know, you weren't in a high school just to study teenagers? That would be weird, I guess.
You know what? It goes.
You weren't cruising high schools. Let's get that out of the way.
No, I can affirm that I was not cruising high schools. Yeah. I think for me, body language, drawing body language and facial expressions is super important. And I think drawing teenagers in particular, how they express themselves physically was as important for me as the words they're saying. And again, it just went back to just looking at a lot of images of teenagers in high school, like online, just like, high school Facebook pages, and just getting a sense of like how, and I know teenagers as well. Like I'm all my friends have kids and I'm around teenagers like quite often. So, I'm not, it's not a completely, bizarre thing to observe. Like I'm kind of used to it, but for me, like, because there's a lot of text in that book in My Fairy Godfather, the passages where there aren't any words and it's just like a page or two of just visuals, that's when it becomes even more important to just communicate clearly through body language and facial expressions what exactly is going on.
My daughter had a couple friends that I had to ask permission for, because I was like, these two girls and their wardrobe and stuff kind of have a vibe. Do you mind sending me more pictures? Which is, it's an odd thing to do, but they were very nice and good at that too, to try to get that 17-year-old vibe down, even though, again, transposed from a girl that's in Austin, transposed down to liberal, but like, there were a couple of my oldest daughter's friends that I was like, oh, that's interesting.
And I don't know your personal acquaintances, but do you have also like gay friends, just to know also how to write a gay character? Because as we can see with Adam and his not husband, but almost, there's not just one way to be an homosexual in the United States and to assume it, or just to
well, I feel like there's I mean, if there is a spectrum of your sexuality that there it seems to be, and then we're all on the spectrum trying to figure it out. And so to that degree, yeah, I had a lot of gay friends.
Yeah, and they read.
And actually, after I wrote the screenplay, I sent it to 10 friends who were gay and godparents and asked for their feedback to see what they felt about it, if it rang, things rang true for them, and if there was something that they found offensive that I didn't mean to be offensive, or if something didn't feel authentic. And in fact, one small detail I thought was interesting was because Adam is a cinephile, we have a lot of posters up, and there was one of the posters that I wanted in his house because I felt it would be iconic for him and resonate for him. And one of my friends said, well, given his age and who he is, like, I don't think that would be the movie. Like they picked on that. And I said, well, what do you think the movie would be? And he said, well, Xanadu. And I said, Xanadu? You mean, like, I was like, how would that be with the roller skating and Gene Kelly? And I was like, oh, okay. And then my friend said, yeah, I saw that 14 times. And I was like, wow, okay. There's, that was a small detail from someone's personal life that I had totally missed. But again, also being raised around San Francisco, and again, my brother's best friend who managed the Castro is family to us, and I spent a lot of time at the Castro Theater. So I, again, through empathy and imagination, also sat through a lot of films during a very difficult time for other people, and people were losing whole communities there during the AIDS epidemic. My mother happened to be an oncology nurse, and so that's where a lot of AIDS patients were too. There has been always around my generation I don't know, like it's just been something in my life as well. without the sexual part personally, but like that, it doesn't even seem that as interesting, One of the points of the book too is that like Adam has like intimacy issues. So you're just like, as one of his many characters, like why can't he also just have, he doesn't want to get married right away because like, why would, you know what I mean? Like he just doesn't want to kind of. And so, I mean, the key is just to keep things human and then also to try to understand what people might be going through culturally because, you can't just be out in a lot of places. And so people make decisions about how out they're going to be.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to.
And to me, it's much more interesting. That's again why it was set there instead of the Castro. In the Castro, we have naked people walking around too. Forget like whatever their sexual orientation is. But like, yeah, people kiss all the time in public and hold hands, and it's great. But here's a character that probably wouldn't kiss his boyfriend in the supermarket because there can be different sort of response to it that he doesn't want to live with. And that's more than just going through your idea of PDA, a public display of affection or something. So anyway, I don't. That's my response to it. And also, like Billy is, I'm assuming is sort of heteronormative in this one too. So like it's just and I'm not a girl, but I have to imagine what my daughters are going through, or what Claire is going through, or.
But you made it read to your daughter.
Yeah. I hope, they haven't read it yet.
Okay.
So I hope one of my daughters is fluent in French. So we'll see what she says, but I hope it works. I mean, and if it doesn't, I hope we get called out on that, not who I am autobiographically, but that specifically this didn't ring true for somebody because that's all fair. Including from my daughters or from liberal Kansas or whatever. That's great. But I don't think you have to have a particular autobiography to imagine other characters.
No. But still, even if though you said just before that you wanted the humanity to be at the forefront of your story, this is quite a really political book, mostly for the LGBT community, and it's really hard for at really several points to see how the homophobia is just ramping throughout people, which is like in the supermarket or at school. And I guess the statement of this book obviously was to make something also to think against homophobia.
Yeah, definitely. I think it seems like, especially in the US, there's like, it feels at times like things are going in the wrong direction in terms of sexual liberation. And it all fits into the sort of culture war bullshit. And when rights are being taken away and rights are being threatened, in the US, we had abortion rights overturned. And there's a lot of fears that have been circulating for the past year that gay rights could be next. And for me, I felt like this, like in terms of gay marriage and there's various other bits as well. I felt like this book is like really, hopefully, coming out at the right time, to just sort of humanize and normalize like a gay couple. They have their own struggles, and it's an adjustment for them to suddenly be having to look after a 16-year-old girl who has just had a major trauma in her life. And she has to adjust too to living with her godfather and his boyfriend. And in many ways, she's more comfortable with the situation than they are. I mean, that's my perception. I don't know.
Yeah, I think people have a lot of fear, and if you can show people's humanity, then you lose some of that fear. I mean, that's just it. I mean, people basically want a lot of the same things. They want to be safe. They want to love their loved ones. They want family. They want, food on the table. They want a job. They want freedom of expression, freedom to love who they want. And that seems very basic and very kind of human rights stuff. And so, when you have a character that's not really afforded that just seems shitty and odd and needing to be rectified. But I always sort of attempt to try to not be, I don't know, hit you over the head with something. And I think the best way too, because the argument, again, about immigration or people are evil or they're sinners or they're, hordes or they're pestilence. Like you hear all these words, you know what I mean? And it's just wild. So as soon as you show them as human, that argument goes out the door. They're, in anybody who you're othering, it goes out the door because we're all human. We're all just trying to fall in love. We're all just trying to construct our day. We're all just trying to maybe have an orgasm. You know what I mean? And so it's really, you shouldn't be beaten up or feel scared to love somebody, and then to embrace them and to publicly embrace them. It's ridiculous. But I think in Florida or something, our two books might be, 1-2 for what DeSantis is like, afraid of.
That was exactly my next point, because we have been hearing a lot about banned books in the United States for the last two years, especially books for young readers. So yeah. I guess this is not like typically a book for young readers, but since it's not out yet in the United States, do you fear that it could be banned in some states?
Yeah, look, they're banning Toni Morrison. They're banning
by the way, she's a better writer, and just those are better books. No offense to what we do, but
yeah, you're right. In certain states, there is this. Under the mantra of protecting children, right? So you're erasing people and their stories and their humanity by banning these books because a book just happens to show a kid who's trans or
two polar bears.
Yeah, it's just like it's, and like you said, Robert, it's just based on hysteria and fear of the other, and in Florida is it's taken off and it has its own momentum. So yeah, we'll see what happens, but
it's not a cohesive argument either, by the way. We have 50 states, and so what some people say, who's banning what where, it's not even exactly clear. So the argument about Toni Morrison or some other books or something is you don't want your children reading this or access to this or something. And in some ways they're not suggesting that it's part of the curriculum for a 5-year-old. You know what I mean? It kind of changes, but what they're doing is putting pressure on librarians often and school programs and stuff and teachers so that they don't get to select their books and their catalog, got my wife's a teacher too. So my dad's a teacher, my sister's a teacher. What is the word I'm looking for? You can't select your, anyway, the books that you're going to teach. Curriculum. There you go. So you can't have your curriculum, and that's ridiculous. And then if by omission, you're also saying that a lot of people in different lifestyles and different sexualities and different colors and different histories don't exist by just showing, white, male, hetero stories constantly. And so it's an attempt to scrub that, but it's also really an attempt to, I think, to create a tempest in a teapot while, the environment is struggling. Republicans are trying to, take away women's rights. People are having they're completely, they don't want any oversight of anything from the EPA to any control. It's they don't want no regulation of things. So this is a way to have people up in arms and to vote for people, and so that they can actually just do other things. This is, I don't think it's even it's an issue, but it's not an actual issue. That's the way I feel. Again, but you tell that to someone who's fighting it, it's definitely an issue to librarians who are getting fired and feel like they can't do their job. It's definitely an issue for teachers that feel like, they can't teach Toni Morrison, or that they have to take, entire input from people where it's not their job. That's ridiculous. There's a time and a place to talk about curriculum and what's appropriate, but then you have to leave it to those people. the public doesn't get to, I guess they do right now, but decide what science is. Like that's, so, you have English teachers, you have art teachers, you have other, history teachers, and they should be in charge of the curriculum, not parents who may or may not have any expertise or any knowledge in that subject. I mean, that's just ridiculous. But in America, we're definitely going through like, ideas of reality and feelings over content and facts. Yeah. And so that's all that is. And then in the meantime, they're having like sweeping policy changes that are really rough. It's just kind of rampant libertarianism, capitalism through a Republican lens. And then truthfully, there's 30% of America that's very uber Christian, and so they actually believe that abortion is evil, is evil, and that those are sinners and those are souls that we're killing, and they believe that homosexuality is evil and that those people are going to hell. And so that's what we're also up against. I don't believe that. So what do you do? Because how do you go to the grocery store then? How do you express yourself? How do you're supposed to have your freedom of expression and personal liberties? How does that affect? They've twisted the language around so that they're like, well, my liberty is affected by not having a heteronormative, polar bear in this children's story, or my liberty is affected when I see, two people kiss that I don't think should be kissing. It's like ridiculous.
And in this regard, did you restrain yourself in what you were showing in this book? Because we've got a gay couple, we've got also a teenager which is discovering love, which is having just a love relationship with a guy, but you're not showing anything really sexual. It's kisses at the most, and it's not essential to the story, of course, but I wanted to know also if in regards to what we were speaking about culture war and banned books, if you had to put restraints on yourselves about what you were going to show in this book.
I think that's probably more a question for you, because it didn't seem to me like showing those elements would have been kind of distracting. And it didn't seem like not having those elements in the story for me didn't detract from the story.
No, like I said, it's not essential. But it could have just been like I'm not speaking about a sex scene, but just something more intimacy. Like we would see Bill and his boyfriend in a bed, or Adam and his boyfriend like that.
I mean, I suppose we could have had a scene with Adam and Stephen lounging around in bed. I think with Billy and her new boyfriend, I think that was quite a new situation between them. But I mean, I guess I don't know how you feel about it, because I'm just responding to Robert's text, and for me, it never felt like it was an issue that we weren't depicting like scenes like that.
Yeah, again, it's just it's maybe a manner of, in general, that's. Maybe I'm just a prude in general. Like I don't go for the big sex scenes. I fade to black, show to the curtains or something like that. Anyway, and whether, it doesn't matter who's really doing it. It was important to show the intimacy in them kissing, but I also think that they're private people, Adam more so too. So that like, that's not something, I don't know the reader to go into that particular bedroom to see that, or to have it be explicit for panels and pages. Same with the well, they don't really have sex.
Actually, there is one scene where we do. I just remembered in the hotel with Hank.
Oh,
so but that's like you hear.
But it's after.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Where they can't sleep.
Yeah, you can hear it coming through the wall.
That's right. Yeah.
And again, it's through the door. Like, so I don't know. There's a film, All of Us Strangers.
I haven't seen that yet.
It's really good, very good. I didn't really like the ending, but the rest of it's brilliant. And it's super deep and intimate. And there's a scene where, there's a bunch of scenes where the men are this couple are having sex, and there's one where there's cum on this guy's chest, and this guy wipes it off, and and eats it, and that's that film. That's not our book.
Mm.
And they probably had different sorts of intentions in trying to show particular intimacies or what that director really wanted to show, but it just wasn't part of this. And again, I think our precocious 15-year-olds up, 17, 18, I think it's really great, but I don't know. I just don't think that's this particular book.
It seemed like also we were kind of going for a bit of an homage to John Hughes.
Yeah.
And if you think about his films, it kind of has the same language of love in a way without explicitly showing sex. I think. I can't remember. Off the top of my head, I'm just thinking, no, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, no.
It might have been interesting in a way because there's a scene where that we show a Warhol, Joe D'Alessandro film, and the town's not ready, or they have the back cover, all the different reactions to it, right? And that's pretty interesting. And that was that's a Warhol film, though. Do you know what I mean? Of people having sex, and that was a big deal at the time. Probably was rated X at the time too, or something, and. That doesn't really exist now. And so showing that and then showing their reactions and this full spectrum of the reactions I really love.
Yeah, and the splash page.
Yeah. And then Steven, the kind of punchline is he knows and he covers his eyes, but then he peeks out sort of semi-erotic, of the scene itself, titillated, if you will. You know what I mean? But even that, we picked a frame that was, or you picked a frame that was really, to me, very interesting, but it wasn't hardcore.
Yeah.
It was from a butt.
You could kind of tell what's going on.
Yeah.
Do you remember, Robert, early on when we were making this book and I was making posters? So basically, one of Robert's tasks was to think of the types of posters that would be, on the walls of Adam's house. And one of them, I made one that was a Warhol poster of a Jean Genet novel. And its content is quite sexual and quite explicit. I remember you were like, I don't really think that's Adam's vibe. He's like, he's not that out. He's not expressing that kind of sexual side of him in his own, because he would be quite self-conscious if visitors came over and they saw that on his wall.
Yeah, that's not who that's right. That wouldn't be it was Xanadu.
It was Xanadu, yeah.
And other sort of, I don't know, I guess, romance is romantic is the wrong word because everybody has their own kind of ID. But I think from his upbringing, I think he also had to find his way and iconography and different storytelling in what was there, which would be, American B cinema, and then sort of blockbustery stuff. And then in his own way finding older historical cinema and stuff. And so that to me was a lot of what I learned at the Castro Theater. I was like, okay, what would this person be like, a Castro movie fan, because that's a definite particular perspective coming out of San Francisco. That was a definite interesting film history that I super appreciated growing up. And my brother's best friend, helping give me that education as well too, not by just what they showed there, but the discussions about the films and stuff, and with his lens, which also was like a Marxist lens and stuff too. It's not just the lens of your sexuality or something too, but showing it at the Castro, it means a totally different thing. You get cheers and jeers and claps and in different places, and some things play or don't play because of it, and there's a big relief for some things, and there's a big disgust for other things. And so I don't know, I was just trying to be sensitive to that and imagine that. And then again, like I asked a bunch of my friends too who are cinemaphiles to like what would work too or what wouldn't work,
because you wanted also in this book to pay homage to the traditional theater.
For cinema, for sure, absolutely.
What's important to you with that?
I mean, it's the way it's partially how we express our stories and our humanity. I really feel it's a huge loss right now that in America that like movie theaters and the movie going experience is more disappearing, and our movie history and is disappearing. And it's the screens are being made smaller. And the screens are really made to be watched now with two screens going. You know, it's like almost assumed that people are going to watch at home, either on their TV or on their computer while they're checking their phone. I mean, how do you watch David Lean? How do you say that you saw a Kurosawa film? How do you say you saw, Pasolini or something if you watched it on your phone or on your computer, while you were doing other things? Like, that's not it. And going into a dark place with strangers and having this other experience, this other sensual, collective experience. To me, that's going to the movies. It's not being in a movie theater alone or in my house alone or watching something on the metro alone in parts, and having made a couple films too, I'm sensitive to all the time that you do, working on editing, all the time you work on sound design, all the time you're trying to figure things out for the big picture. It's the big picture on a big screen. And you can't show that if the screens don't exist. And so now people are kind of going smaller, except for the Marvel films, but the Marvel films are their own entity, and they're sort of dying, and they're not really made for me. And they're a different kind of bombastic sort of experience too.
And they still have their issues right now. They were like the top of the
I think
movie going after in just before COVID. But right now there has been some issues last year, mostly about the comic book movies.
You can only eat so many, tortilla chips or something like, and then you also, if you start learning and get hooked on a particular thing, you're going to want more. I always joke that like if you start with Agatha Christie or something, you end up at Dostoevsky. Like at some point you're going to read Crime and Punishment, or like, you're going to move and evolve through, what you consider a murder mystery or a police procedural. And so once you're hooked on these other things, you're going to try to find people who are better at it. Or better at particular storytelling, not just special effects or something, which are all wonderful. But for me, that's not what resonates. Those are not the films that I gravitate towards necessarily. As much as I just talked about scope or something, I'm much more into films like The Last Detail, or films about two people getting on a bus, or All of Us Strangers. I thought was fantastic, and it's not a big film, so to speak, so that's what I like.
Is it hard in a comic book, in a book like that, to make so many cinephile references? Are you thinking about the guys who, like me, don't have these references? Do you think that? Are you thinking about will they get it? Will they be completely lost?
For me, it was both. They have to resonate. And so if you don't know what they are, you have to at least get the feeling that there's a conversation out there. I donated a whole bunch of books to my high school because they're not there. And even if the kids don't read them or pick them up, they're confronted with the fact that somebody, thinks that these have a value, and that somebody, that they actually exist in the world. So if you see this, you're like, well, okay, here's a person that's owned a movie theater their whole life, that loves film. And what are these posters? I've never heard of these films. You might be curious to go see them. Or it would tell you a little something too, that like, maybe they're more esoteric than your normal film. Like that's a character thing, intentionally having stuff that may not be a blockbuster film. And we definitely chose, or I chose films that represented a particular time and place, and things that I like as well. Like even the Burt Reynolds film, like it was The Longest Yard. I thought was interesting to show, because I thought that maybe because he's a football player, but I think maybe he thought Burt Reynolds was cute.
Yeah. I mean, I think like the way we referenced a lot of cinema, and to be fair, some of those references I wasn't familiar with as well. I feel like hopefully the way they're integrated into the story, even if you're not super familiar with what they are, it'll make sense. Like in the context of the story, there was like a reference to John Wayne at one point, and there's like a John Wayne poster behind the counter in the little cinema in this book. I'm trying to think of other cinematic.
But that's very specific too. And in some ways, when things get too specific, right, you have to explain them. And I think that was explained.
It was, yeah.
Where in The Cowboys was one of the two films at the time, I could be wrong on this now, where John Wayne dies. He dies in the Sands of Iwo Jima, I believe, and I think he dies in The Cowboys. And actually, at the Ukiah Theater, there was a gentleman there that used to run the theater, and he didn't go to the movies at all anymore. And I think he said or referenced that film. As soon as they killed John Wayne, he was done. He was just fucking out. And so I thought, to this day, I think that's fantastic and funny. And I get it, because there's a kind of machismo that also represents a completely heteronormative world, right? And this iconography of colonialism and genocide, and that someone doesn't go to the movie as soon as somebody, kills a little bit of that. You know what I mean? I think that's hilarious. And I think it's also an interesting tell for Adam to still be confronted with that and to actually put that up in his house or the thing. So his father and that generation or that kind of story, he's still completely aware of. And in some ways it's an inroad to let other people know that that's a dominant narrative, and that some of the movies and other things are not the dominant narrative, and that he's had to find his way because there's not like a big narrative for that community, or to see himself on the film, on the screen. Just he doesn't exist in a John Wayne world. You have to find your way around it. There's an old, not to interrupt, but there's an old Richard Pryor thing said that he used to love cowboys and cowboy and Indian movies, and then he said, but one day he realized that he was the Indian, and he was like, it's like, and you're like, wow, yeah, this becomes really difficult to watch, aside from identifying as not as a First Nation or Native American, but in Indians. Like, I think that's interesting.
You change a little bit your style when you are drawing the shots from the movies, or am I just mistaken? Because it seems you are more like into a more photorealistic drawing style in these shots. Or?
Yeah, I did. I think really simply because I just wanted to make sure people could recognize what film and what actor was being represented. So I tried, excuse me, to get quite precise, and also with the colors, because there's like Molly Ringwald, who features in the book a scene from Pretty in Pink, I believe. And then there's another scene from Pretty in Pink as well. So I just wanted to make it very clear that was the movie that was being represented. I'm trying to think. Oh, there's the butt scene. I don't know. For me, those are just like fun.
It's just a butt. But.
Yeah. I don't know. Artistically, I just like it's rich. I just wanted to really go for it. And
you put the pimple on there too. Like you actually.
Yeah, we had a conversation about how many pimples should be on the butt. Because the actual butt in the movies got quite a lot of marks on it. And I think we settled somewhere. I think initially I had more pimples on the butt, and we dialed it back a little bit.
That's four of them.
Exactly. Well, the other thing that I don't think we stated is that Liberal, Kansas is the hometown of Dorothy.
Yeah, I was going to that also. Yeah.
So we set the thing, with this other girl coming to the hometown of No Place Like Home, like all of that. And Judy Garland was a huge icon for the gay community. So here you have this conservative place that in its own way is an homage to one of the like gay icons, right? And maybe it's lost on them or not. I think that's kind of funny too. And Clara's dressed up like a Dorothy, and the Friends of Dorothy, like all of that is running through the whole thing, whether the town or readers, pick up on all of that. It's all a kind of funny contrast that way.
Yeah, and there is an actual Wizard of Oz museum in Liberal that is depicted in the book. I mean, that is pretty much how it looks like. And they do, and the young women who work there, they do dress as Dorothy, and they tend to be Latina as well. Like I was again looking through their social media posts just to get the vibe, just to get a sense of what it looks like. But yeah, that exists in that town.
That's my cousin and I wrote like a quick treatment, and we're gonna pitch this down in Hollywood, which we did a long time ago before we wrote a screenplay. Before I wrote the screenplay, because he didn't write the screenplay on this one, I wrote it all. It was my idea, and blah blah blah. But anyway, we were thinking, all right, well, where do we put this? Because it's okay. We don't want to do the Castro because that was the what I thought was the first story. So we wanted to put it somewhere, and we were looking up towns. And as soon as we saw that Liberal was the hometown of Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, and we knew that the person was going to have the retro movie theater there, we were like, well, yeah, nowhere else in the world can this be set. Sorry, Liberal, but that's like, you did it to yourself there.
I get another question for you, John. As far as the pacing is done, because it's really rich, and there's some pages where you go to almost 30 different panels. How did you approach the pacing with the Robert script?
It was difficult, to be honest, because
I guess so. Yeah.
Unlike Windows on the World, this had a lot more dialogue and a lot more text, so the pacing of the book, it's just finding that balance between how the reader's interacting with the book, how they're turning the page, when does a scene end and a new scene needs to begin, and making sure that hits in the right moment. And that did necessitate sometimes having to draw, 25 panels, which is not my favorite thing to do. But some scenes just, that was necessary to end a particular scene on that particular page. I had to panel it out in that way. And there were a couple of other moments in the book. There's 2 or 3 pages I'm thinking about where instead of doing that approach of just like many multi-panels, it's quite a bit of work. I just had a central character with a big speech bubble and a lot of text in there. And I know for a reader to encounter that much text can be a bit much, because my focus is like making the reader engaged, making sure they stay engaged and they want to turn the page again. So I don't do that too often where they're having to like read a lot of text. But I'm basically just responding to what Robert is writing, like responding to the text. And then
but he's writing like page 23, 25 panels. Do you
no.
Well, that's the shorthand to being working together. We also now have a better idea based on a screenplay, which is not what we're going to do next time, but what the page count actually responds to, or what the scenes kind of respond to in terms of the panel. And then I was saying before too, we're either lucky or not lucky, in the sense that graphic novels are sort of, the whole medium is new to me in a way. It's in the same way that noir fiction is endless or something. I've certainly read graphic novels, but it's not my bread and butter, and it's not my, I haven't gone super deep with it, so that I'm still a novice. And so whenever he shows me the pages, they have to work for a novice. And so if I'm lost, then you feel like, because it's not our intention to be super abstract or to lose the reader. And so when I'm reading it back, if I'm lost visually or otherwise, then we feel like our average reader would be lost.
Definitely.
And so then we tweak as we should, and we have interaction too about how jokes land. Often that's part of it. I'll be like, oh, this is intended to be more funny, and so we have to hit that more, or this is more of the detail that should probably pop out if we're going to continue to use it throughout, like as a motif or as a personality trait. Clara's cross. We were talking about how we came upon that and other details within all of the characters.
Yeah.
I mean, I love, the funny part is, and this sounds really strange, but like anything I've ever written, I really love all the characters. I have a big heart for everybody in the book, especially the main characters.
I would say even Nick. But
what?
Even Nick.
Yeah, well, Nick is Nick's a jerk.
We've all known Nicks.
Yeah, we've all known our Nicks. I mean, Nick's, if anything, he's the closest to a stereotype kind of thing. But
yeah,
I have a 17-year-old boy now too, and there's a the Nick aspect of him, or that full thing is really, really rough. I mean, and that was the kid that definitely bullied me throughout life and stuff too.
Yeah, same. Like when I was in high school, I was like with a crowd of. They weren't really friends, but I hung out with them, and quite similar to the group that's depicted in the book. And it was really hard because they were always coming out with homophobic stuff. It was just like part of our everyday language that I was surrounded by, and it made my skin crawl. But I was also too emotionally immature to really know what to do about it. And when I graduated high school, I left those friends and just I never saw them again, because I just felt like they're never going to progress. They're never going to evolve. Their views are never going to evolve. They're only going to live in this small town for the rest of their lives. And I just wanted to broaden my young horizons.
I was a jock too. I mean, I was an artist and a jock, so I was around it a lot, and I'm sure I contributed to it too. I mean, there's a language that's out there, right? It's a heteronormative language, and if that's the language of the day, that's what you're kind of slinging. And if you're afraid too, then you don't want to get beat up. Then you're gonna try to do and emulate things to keep you safe at times. And sometimes you make a stand, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you don't even realize that you should have made a stand until it's the rearview mirror. Mm-hmm. One of my really good friends in high school came out afterwards, and I was like, oh, I felt bad that he couldn't at the time, or didn't feel like he could, or couldn't tell me until later, and that I didn't pick up on it. And I thought about all of the cinema that we saw, all of the conversations that were around about things that were not even close to sensitive, with awful language and stuff that must have made him feel like shit. And welcome to 1984 Ukiah. I mean, again, I'm not saying that gets anybody off the hook, but that's part of the difficulty with language and stuff, and part of the fight that's going on right now, that, picking your pronouns and things like that. It's all, it's super important. And it's very interesting who gets to say what, when, and what sticks, And so, fuck Nick.
I can assure you that 1984.
But he's also just a form of who he is. He's getting fed, so why would he do anything else? Like, if that's how he's going to get laid and that's how he's going to create his strength, it's part of the human condition that some people are going to embrace that, and they're not going to be sensitive, and they don't really care, and they're going to run rampant as long as they can.
Yeah, but I also have memories from Vendenheim 2002, in which we were also very, very rude to some other guys, and we had I guess high school or is rough for everyone.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. Trying to find your way is super rough, and I mean, back to sexist language and racist language. I mean, it's just to not it's America's a rough place. The world is a rough place. I'm gonna go out on a limb, and so we're trying to show the conflict, and also try to show some of the the grace and the struggle. Everybody carries their own sorrow. I mean, that's also in all of our books.
Yeah, nobody's perfect, and we all had also we did wrong at some times. But the thing is that you wanted also to end on a happy ending.
Always, I always try. I'm Capra. I'm a Capra guy. They call that Frank Capra. Okay. Capricorn. It's a Wonderful Life. Like, he did a bunch of noir stuff first, but in Hollywood, he was known as having a kind of over the top happy ending, and I really appreciate that. I read a lot of other stuff, and my favorite films probably don't end on an upbeat, but I like it. And And I also like we're talking about cultures and regions and large things that tell you who, outside external forces that tell you who you are, but then the fight to be yourself and to explore yourself and to be able to explore yourself. And that kind of dichotomy or problem I find really interesting. And I've said this before, and John's heard me, like, I find it very interesting that if someone were to ask me who I am, I would probably say I'm a father, I'm a 9th generation Californian, I'm a writer, I'm a storyteller, I love sports. And people then would say, whoa, are you hetero? And I say, oh, yeah, okay, I'm hetero. And they'd say, well, okay, that's first. And you say, well, no, not really on my list. It's like, right, but back to Adam, our character, he would say, I'm a cinephile, I play football, I'm from Kansas. And then they'd be like, well, are you gay? And he would say, yeah. And he's like, well, okay, that's first. And he's like, no. And they're like, no, we're going to make that first. I'm lucky enough to have the permission to walk around in ways that it's not as big an issue to be hetero. So the world is pushing that on to Adam to make it more important than he would, have it be in his own particular life. And I find that interesting in all of the stories. In Windows on the World, like, Fernando doesn't know what Mexican means once he crosses that border. He didn't have any idea what the hell that there would be such pejorative, I think, nature and like, what? I'm a rapist. I'm a what? What is this? I'm part of a horde. Really? Like, what is with it? I'm just looking for my dad here, man.
Am I going to steal your jobs and your wives? What?
Yeah, that's crazy, right? Same. You're just like, I just want to stick tab A into slot B or slot B up against slot B or whatever the hell. It's just like, I'm just trying to get through the day and fall in love. Like, why are you pushing? And that's super important, but why are you making that the most important, interesting thing about me? And really trying to control it. That's just bizarre.
Is it hard to draw the last page? What are you feeling when you're just doing the last panel? Do you feel relief? And do you know that you stick the landing when you're just finished?
I would say yes, there is a bit of relief that I'm finishing the story. But honestly, whether I've kind of stuck the landing, like Robert was saying earlier, like the way we work, sometimes, because it is a lot of work, and I'll go, and it's a very solitary endeavor making comics. You're there on your own for 8 hours a day by yourself drawing, and sometimes I can get lost in my own logic about how a scene needs to be depicted, and it makes sense to me. But sometimes, when Robert reads it, he's like, this isn't quite clear. I'm not sure this is quite working. So we'll kind of figure out another way to represent, the scene. And that's same with the ending. It was written very clearly in the screenplay. I had a pretty good idea of what I needed to do, based on just the cues in the screenplay, what needed to be present on the page. So it wasn't too difficult, as long as I was, in those last few pages, and it is a happy ending, it is nice. And again, I don't tend to gravitate towards stories that end on that sort of upbeat note, but I think it was nice in this context to have that. All I needed to do is just have the right elements on the page and make sure the characters, the right emotion was being represented in those last 3 pages. And then it was just kind of like how, sending it back to you, see what you think.
I was like, hey man, what's up with that hat?
Oh yeah. There was like, I drew a hat very strangely on one of the characters, and you're like, yeah, actually, you know what? That's a good example, because I was, working so many long hours, and I hadn't realized I'd drawn this hat looking very strangely.
Which one? The one on?
Yeah. I think it was it her, that hat right there?
Okay.
It just looked really bizarre, and I didn't notice it, and I was like, oh yeah, that looks really weird. So I had to, like, okay, fair enough. I'll move it around a little bit.
I'm not sure. Like again, was Dylan? I mean, I forget. That's an interesting kind of panel to end on because I forget too. But I remember we talked about it a little bit because it was important and what who would be in there and had to be in there as well, and who would be making eye contact with who was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
That was kind of typical. But yeah, you must. One of the things I think about drawing and storytelling is you have a backstory for all these people too, and then there's edits and stuff. And so sometimes you forget what's taken out or what never hits the page.
Yeah.
And so you think it's all there, and then you realize, oh no, you never said that about that person.
Yeah.
They were never wearing that's not a black dress. Like they've never worn a black dress. You're like, what do you mean? I pictured them in a black dress. There was a whole scene. And you're like, oh no, that got cut or it never hit the page. Like, John had decided or whatever that they looked a particular way, and, and then you just think that they are, and then it might have changed or never happened.
But did that happen in the book? Like were there cuts or a scene that you were meant to draw that didn't do it in the final product? Because I don't know how long was the screenplay, the original screenplay, compared to what you did.
105
tight pages.
Exactly. Yeah. It was meant to be a screenplay. It was, hopefully someone will buy it. But as opposed to Windows on the World, which ended up being like 230 pages when you drew it out, or 260 or something. We got better insane at that as well. There's the old joke about screenplays too, where like you take something like Lord of the Rings, and there's a little dialogue, and then there's just one line that doesn't. Normally, it's a minute a page, right? And I mean, it's a kind of rule of thumb. But like on something like and so then you also calculate, well, what's if you have 105 pages, you have 105 minutes, you break it down. This is what the cost is going to be, relative. But in something like Lord of the Rings, you'll have like some conversation, and then they'll say they battle, right? And then the battle's 12 minutes, and like $600 million or something, 60 million, right? But where the other me and you talking in our Wookiee outfits or something is not like that didn't cost much, And so this, because there wasn't as much travel. The locations are minimal. So you don't have to have what we would call, I guess, in graphic novels and in films, establishing shots or to create the landscape over and over again.
Yeah.
What is Mazatlan like? What's the border like? What's New York like? What's this part of New York like? What's his house like?
Yeah.
John really went deep into Adam's house, making an architectural rendering of the whole thing in 3D. So he knew what that house was.
Yeah.
But you look and there's not that many locations. So that was all discussed and figured out. And so you don't need those pages to discuss it after you've done it, once.
And I don't think we ended up having to redraw a lot. I mean, I've turned into.
I think I'm the annoying one, by the way.
No, I'm trust me, I can be annoying as well, in my own way. A bit of a perfectionist in terms of like, because what'll happen is like, and this happens with every book that I've done. It takes the first 20 or 30 pages really to get a feel for what everyone looks like, for the setting, and as the book progresses, this happens every time. I will review the book. And I'll have to go and change some things in the beginning because characters evolve, their faces evolve, their bodies evolve. And just in terms of consistency, I'll go back and just make little changes that, to be fair, most people probably wouldn't even pick up on, but I see it. And it bothers me. In terms of like having to edit out particular scenes because they weren't working, I don't think we really had to do that. There might have been like the odd panel.
Right.
That wasn't quite hitting. So I might, redraw a particular panel. But I think like the way we work in terms of how we, the process of editing in real time, where Robert gets sent a bunch of pages, he'll feed back to me. And it's gotten to the point right now, because we've worked together for so long, where a lot of the observations that Robert makes and like the things that he might suggest need changing, they're very small. They're very nuanced. They might just slightly improve a scene or someone's,
like that's Wicker. It's got to look more like Wicker.
Or like
there's a joke. You got to hit Wicker, right?
Yeah.
Like something like that. And you're like, okay. I think I'm getting better personally at knowing what's a big change and a little change, a little bit like knowing the craft or your craft, what you have or you're up against. Like, so if you're asking him to change something that has to be changed on every panel because it's a character detail, like that's not going to happen. Like that shift sail, or particulars again of like how we could go about things. Like I think I'm better at understanding where your time and energies are spent. So the comments aren't, we get at the big ones earlier. Like we can go through we cast the characters earlier. I noticed it for you and your obsessive nature too, because you do things freehand and stuff, that some of the panels where there are dialogue, sometimes it's difficult, or you would go back and change so that the character who shows up a bunch, it's hard to do that over and over again to have that kind of consistency. And that's the places that you would go back and say, okay, no, look at his nose, or we would talk about that. Whose fucking hair is this? Or you know what I mean? Or something like, but again, like a lot of times I think most people wouldn't notice that, but we're so into it and you're deep into it that you're like, wow, okay, yeah, you're right. Those aren't Billy's eyebrows, oh shit, that's, that left one's Clara's eyebrows, like, you know what I mean, or whatever. It doesn't. Look, he's over here, and he looks like he's got like, he's really, his hair's all normal, and then to me, it's like again back to film continuity. You're like, look, the margarita is half full. You know what I mean? So if you turn around, if you watch like Thelma and Louise in that scene, you'll notice that one of the shots, keeps going where she obviously took a different drink and nobody saw the continuity there, and the glass goes down, the glass goes up, glass goes down. And if you're looking at a panel of 9 pictures or 12 pictures sometimes, you're like, oh, hey, look, like the part is a little to the left on the hair. I mean, it's always like hair, eyes, kind of mouth.
All right.
Anyway,
and for the next question, which is obvious, what holds the future for you? Because you mentioned that you were going to work again together. And this is not going to be a screenplay, but really a script for a graphic novel from the basis. And so what can you tell us about? And I've got one question especially. Is it going to be less in the real life setting? Are you going to do something like science fiction or something like that?
Oh, it's real life, I'll tell you.
It's still real life. All right.
My father ran a home for juvenile delinquents where I was partially raised. And so it's tentatively called Crime Scene. And it's about my father's group home and my time there, but also about the 60s and 70s in specifically the Bay Area, San Francisco, and the radical times of the civil rights movement, free speech movement, anti-Vietnam movement, brown power movement, with all of these different organizations that were super radical, not just in America, but right in the Bay Area. And my dad and my uncles and his friends and our community were all swept up into that. And so when the sort of 60s stopped, if you will, what a lot of people think, a lot of people, it didn't stop for them. And it didn't stop for their children either. So the influences and choices that the times had on my father created a space so that he could have this home for juvenile delinquents out in the middle of nowhere. And that's partially where I was raised, and that partially formed how I see the world too, and my politics and personal sort of outlook. So it's about that.
So is it going to be autobiographical? Like the main character will be you and your fathers, or are you still?
I have a brother and sister. I think that there's going to be. I would rather call it fiction, just because there's more freedom there, and you can also make the story better because real life isn't tightened as much. But I don't think it's going to flow. I think we're going to depend probably more on Jon and the visuals to make sure that you turn the pages as opposed to a story that moves A, B, C with, like, and where the love interest comes in and the thing turns at a particular moment. That's not what this one is. And so the times are real. And I think some of the people are in fact real. And I think we'll have to do the dance of saying that it's fiction And clearly, when you mention people that are famous or one of the guys at my uncle's group home that my dad lived with, and we knew that was put to death at San Quentin for being a serial killer. I don't think there's any need to change his name, but other people who may come back and stab me and try to kill my kids, we might change their names. You combine characters. I think for the sake of the thing, to have a few actions that happened that didn't happen with one person, you combine the character, something that maybe I saw, somebody else could see. And so I'll have to go back also and look and see how some semi-autobiographical things like This Boy's Life or something like that, if Toby wrote that and said it was a memoir or something, like, I don't quite know. And again, the point isn't to offend people. And so it's also deeply personal. Like I said, I got a brother and sister walking around and family members and stuff. And so the point isn't to offend the living exactly. Well, it's always, of course, we want to offend the living. But you know what I mean? So it'll be an interesting dance. But I definitely think there'll be a character that's like me, and a character that's very much like my dad and my uncle, and characters very much like the people I lived with at my father's group home. Some of which were, very nice guys put into a really rough situation.
And there's going to be a lot of historical researches for you to do.
Yeah, that's what we're doing right now. Robert has a lot of sort of archived documents and photographs that he's been involved in organizing. And that's what I need, because they are specific to a very specific house in a specific area with specific people and a specific time in the 1970s, early 80s. And when I draw anything, I love doing research. It's just part of my process. And for this in particular, I'll probably go out to California this spring at some point. And actually, I would like to visit, the area and get the vibe of the area, to know it a little bit more. But yeah, there's a process of combination of, using Robert's photographs, and he's got a lot of other documentation. And also, we were on Skype the other week, and we went on Google Earth and found the house, zoomed in, and then you can get a really good feel for how isolated this place is.
I could have told you that. I think I did tell you how isolated it was. Just as a joke, it was. That was the point. Saying, well, guys at my dad's group home used to say the alien tagline for the film was, "In space, nobody can hear you scream," and people would say, "In Redwood Valley at Grapevine, nobody can hear you scream." Like remember that. And it's more of I think it's going to be interesting to probably have elements of a detective or police procedural stuff, because there's too much information that I have that's not like that. Files, mug shots, newspaper articles. So I think that'll end up being part of the motif.
Yeah, sort of a more almost mosaic approach, where chronologically things might move around a little bit, and a little bit less structured like a screenplay, with this sort of 3 acts, inciting incident and stuff. Although I think this has sort of an inciting incident, but it'll be a more creative and a different approach than the previous projects we've done.
And the idea of a crime scene too, I think, is interesting, because it'll mean more than just that. I mean, the crimes will be the actual crimes that happen there, but the crime of also these people being in charge of these kids is, it's a ridiculous thing. The crime of warehousing the poor, possibly the crime too of exposing your young kid to all of this as well. Like, so it won't be just the body drop kind of thing, and so we'll see how that goes.
Okay, well, I'll let you work to
back to work.
You've got to work. You've got a lot of work to do, and hopefully, you'll get back maybe in this living room to speak about it.
Absolutely,
in 2 years. Thank you again, Jon Robert, for giving us this whole time, because it's 1 hour and more than 20 minutes. So it means a lot.
Now you have to edit.
But otherwise it would be perfect. So thank you again, and I hope to speak with you again later.
It's our pleasure.
A pleasure.